Okay, let's get back to what's making the headlines this morning. The UK Core Commercial Court has granted Nigeria leave to present an appeal against the 9.6 billion US dollars for a stay of execution of that judgment money. But Nigeria also got a hands-down order to just make this good in a few weeks' time. And we can make that appeal happen if we pay what the court says security payment, $200 million. That's roughly 90 billion Nigerian currency. And that's one of the stories this morning. Meantime, the petitioner in the case, P&ID, says Nigeria's appeal will not fly unless the country pays what it called a running cost, and that's 250,000 US dollars. Whatever that means, the legal team in London is trying to sort that out, and we'll hear from them over the weekend, perhaps as early as next week, on the way forward and all of that. That's one big story happened this week, and we're just trying to wrap our heads around some of the stories for the week. Meantime, President Buhari says Nigeria lost 157.5 billion dollars to illicit financial flows between 2003 and 2012, and that was based on the data from the 2014 Global Financial Integrity Report. That's, Mr. President says Nigeria will give all it takes to ensure there is no hiding place for the purveyors of corrupt practices who are truly enemies of the people. He therefore advised all African countries that they have no choice but to break the back of corruption. President Buhari called for what he called a coordinated action against illicit financial flows across the continent into developed economies. Meantime, the Central Bank of Nigeria has warned the newly approved payment service banks, or PSBs, to desist from unwholesome practices. According to the director in charge of payment services at the Central Bank, Ademola Adeleke, he says, while we reckon that competition will be stronger with the licensing of new financial service providers, it is important that all operators eschew the tendency for demarketing each other. If you're on the market street, you remember those days of the banks demarketing each other. Now, the central bank says everyone should behave themselves, because demarketing could weaken the banking industry, and everyone should avoid heightening the risks in the financial services sectors. The PSBs are the emerging service providers, which are coming from the telcos such as MTN, and then we have fast-moving consumer goods companies, chain stores, postal services, because the central bank wants to expand the threshold of financial inclusion in Nigeria. So while we have the P&ID's big case in London yesterday, the Institute of Directors held its conference and talked about the need to have this private sector engagement with the government on the new AfCFTA. This is what Special Advisor to the President on Ease of Doing Business, Dr. Jumoke Oduwole, told the audience, representing the Vice President. We'll listen to her in a couple of minutes. But first, let's touch on very briefly on what we spoke about earlier, the big stories. The P&ID case was in London. Then, on the other hand, we had the Parliament and the Prime Minister Boris Johnson, on the other hand, a very nail-biting week on the political street for Juliana and the rest of our team in London. Juliana, it's a Friday, so coming here into this conversation, thank you so much. Hope you had some time to grab a restful night. Looks like one day, one trouble over there. So it's a Friday, so we can say it's a TGIF. But it's been a very tough week when it comes to Brexit and all of that. How did it all come down to this Friday?
Well, Bosun, Brexit talks have definitely entered the end game. The countdown is ticking. Of course, we started off backing Parliament earlier this week because the Supreme Court ruled the Prime Minister's decision to prorogue Parliament was unlawful. So we had MPs in the chambers and they were going back and forth. And I would say this week, one of the biggest talking points to come out of Parliament's resitting really is the toxic language. And I use the word toxic because Brexit really has gotten to that extent. There's been some ferocious back and forths between MPs on all sides. And yesterday morning, there were discussions in the Commons about how they move forward, because clearly there is so much anger, not just on the streets, but amongst MPs. Anyway, this morning, the Brexit secretary, he's headed off to Brussels to meet with the EU chief negotiator, Michel Barnier. And we've been hearing from Downing Street that there is just one mission for him, and that is to get Brexit done. The main sticking point, of course, is the Irish backstop. But nobody can deny that the government are not at least trying to get a deal. They have to anyway, because, of course, now with the Hillary Benn bill, it would be totally illegal for the government to try and leave on the 31st of October without that deal. So that's exactly what they'll be doing today. Stephen Barclay will be working very hard. We heard from the EU spokesperson yesterday that they had indeed received their fourth paper from Britain. So there is a possibility, there could be hope, although the EU Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker, he was speaking to German press yesterday, and in a statement that was released from that, he said that if there will be no deal on the 31st of October, then Britain are to blame.
Very interesting. Is an extension to October 31st on the cards?
Well, it certainly is on the cards. October the 31st is the deadline, but the real deadline is October the 19th. That's what the Hillary Benn bill put in place. So if there is no deal by the 19th of October, then Boris Johnson is legally has to go to the EU and ask for an extension. There are some people, some members of the Liberal Democrats, like their leader Joe Swinson, who's even trying to bring that extension deadline even earlier. So perhaps by the 10th he has to have a deal. But again, Boris Johnson has made it abundantly clear that the UK is leaving on the 31st of October. Of course, as well, the government has spent over £200 million on advertising. So if you're in your radio or reading the news or watching TV, everybody in the UK at the moment is being told to prepare for a 31st of October deadline. But, you know, this is the UK, and 24 hours really has a significance. Who knows, even by intraday, there could be a new update.
That's one big day I would like to be in London and see how it all happens. It's sounding more like the end of the world. Definitely not. That it won't happen on October 31st. That I'm very sure. It's not the end of the UK, October 31st. Whatever happened, deal or no deal. But this is the end of Thomas Cook Group sale. Where are we on this company's collapse? How many folks have been repatriated? This is one nasty business story in a very nasty political Brexit week.
Of course, it's still a big story, and the Civil Aviation Authority say it's now flown a total of 61,000 passengers back into the UK. That's about 40 odd percent. So there's still nearly 100,000 people stranded abroad. 16,000 people are due to fly back into London today into the UK today on some 72 flights. Yesterday in the Commons, amongst all the Brexit debate, we did hear from the Business Secretary, Andrea Leadsom, and she announced that there will be an inquiry into the corporate handling of this situation. There have been several suggestions that chief execs who are on fat paychecks, big business, big bonuses, were, you know, misleading the company and abusing their powers. So there will be an inquiry into exactly what went wrong in the months and weeks up to the Thomas Cook collapse. But also yesterday, she did release some figures, and it's costing the British government, which is the taxpayers, £100 million to bring back stranded Thomas Cook passengers. And it will also cost, the government will have to take some of this funds, £420 million to reimburse customers who had booked Thomas Cook flights in the future. So that's £500 million that will have to go out over the next couple of days and weeks just to resolve this Thomas Cook issue. It's a staggering figure.
It's quite a lot of money to cook up in a kitchen. Thank you so much, Juliana. September is a wrap and all of that. Let's take a breather. Let's talk again at 1:30 on Business Incorporated, and then we can update ourselves on about the Market Street and all of that out of there in London. Thank you so much, Juliana Olayinka from our London studios. Dr. Jumoke Oduwole is the special advisor to Mr. President on ease of doing business, and she was the one who stood in yesterday for the Vice President, Professor Yomi Oshibajo, in the matter of the Conference of the Institute of Directors, talking about the new AfCFTA and what the government is bringing to the table to ensure that Nigeria get the better part of this particular Pan-African trade deal. Take a listen to her.
The AfCFTA, to which Nigeria is signatory, is a laudable development that builds on existing regional initiatives and presents opportunities for increased collaboration and economic integration amongst African economies. These are the early days of the trade agreement, and our deliberations here today as directors of corporate Nigeria and leaders in government, without doubt, will provide a fillip to Nigeria's AfCFTA readiness and economic aspirations. Since the end of the Second World War, trade liberalization and later globalization have continued to shape and dominate relations between states. And with the fall of the Berlin Wall about 3 decades ago, global trade grew from 39% to 58% of world GDP. However, while international trade is vital for the growth and development of any economy, it is also important to ensure that the domestic economy is insulated from unfair trade practices. The tension between national interests and the global liberal trade policy agenda has continued to manifest over the years, whether through the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the GATT, and later the World Trade Organization, with the Doha Round negotiations, which had been stalled for almost 20 years, the recently renegotiated NAFTA under the Trump administration, or the ongoing highly sensational Brexit of the United Kingdom from the EU. Coming closer to base, Africa, though home to 16% of global population, accounts for a paltry 2.63% of global trade. Consequently, hovering at around 17%, international intra-African trade as a share of total African trade is comparably lower than that of other continents, with Asia at 59.6%, Europe at 69.8%, North America at 46%. By implication, over 80% of African trade is with non-African countries. In the words of the former Prime Minister of Nigeria, Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, in 1963, during the meeting of the Organization of African Union, and I quote, "Interstate trade in Africa is 10%, while 90% is done with countries outside Africa. There is no reason why we should not increase an interstate trade on this continent. If we are able to establish an African common market, we shall overcome many difficulties and we shall be in a position to stand on our own in relation to the other parts of the world." Those very words remain ominously true nearly 6 decades later until now. Buoyed by the desire to integrate these African regional economic communities, in 1991, African states under the Abuja Treaty established the EAC for purposes of the establishment of the Continental-Wide Trade Agreement, Common Area Tariff, and Common Market, as well as gradual removal of obstacles to the free movement of goods, persons, services, capital, and the right of residence and establishment. Projected advantages to the continent include a market of 1.2 billion Africans, the largest market in the world, with a current combined GDP of USD 2.5 trillion, and the agreement is expected to increase intra-African trade by up to 52.3%. With an intra-African trade surplus for goods at USD 3.8 billion and a 13.2 billion trade deficit for services, AfCFTA presents both opportunities and threats for the African market. The implementation of the AfCFTA rests on 4 key pillars: trade capacity, which is production capacity and quality infrastructure; trade infrastructure, which is power, roads, rail, ports, aviation; trade environment, which is trade facilitation and ease of doing business, and fiscal and monetary policies; and trade enforcement, which speaks to countervailing duties, anti-dumping, and the like. With our internal market, Nigeria is well placed to tap into the natural gravitational pull for investment attraction, to promote retention and consolidate Nigeria's participation in regional and global value chains. The presidential report, which you're all aware, led to the signing of the agreement, proposes policies, programs, projects, and interventions which adequately position Nigeria to engage in the further AfCFTA negotiations, as many Nigerian companies have already developed capacity across various sectors and have long desired to expand to the rest of Africa, but have been constrained by trade barriers which the AfCFTA is expected to remove by making African trade more attractive and competitive. AfCFTA will also promote a vibrant and competitive industrial sector that is central to job creation and income growth. This will improve the human capital base of the economy. Enlarged regional markets will also provide a platform for cooperation on infrastructure development, technology transfer, and innovation. Therefore, the AfCFTA can transform Nigeria from a target economy to the gateway economy of Africa, boosting job creation through intra-African trade and spurring growth through enhanced economic welfare to an estimated 8% increase in Nigeria's total exports. AfCFTA will also promote a vibrant and competitive industrial sector that is central to job creation and income growth. This will improve the human capital base of the economy. Enlarged regional markets will also provide a platform for cooperation on infrastructure development, technology transfer, and innovation. In complementing the economic diversification objective of Nigeria's Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, the presidential report stated that AfCFTA offers a preferential access to the African market worth USD $500 billion in imported goods and services, of market expansion, and almost $30 billion for import substitution. With giant strides taken by government towards promoting the productive capability of its local manufacturers, Nigeria stands to maximally benefit from this. Therefore, the AfCFTA can transform Nigeria from a target economy to the gateway economy of Africa, boosting job creation through intra-African trade and spurring growth through enhanced economic welfare to an estimated 8% increase in Nigeria's total exports. In spite of the fact that Nigeria only recently signed the AfCFTA, in terms of readiness, we are not at ground zero. At $35 billion, Nigeria's manufacturing value added, a measure of the productive capacity to produce and export semi and fully finished goods, is about 7 times more than the current average of the top 20 African countries. This suggests Nigeria's productive capacity is at a higher level than that of most African countries. However, as an administration, we are well aware that there remains a lot to be done. Nigeria's successful implementation of the AfCFTA rests on 4 key pillars. Moreover, perhaps even prior to the agreement, the policy thrust of this administration has since 2015 identified and focused on many of the priority areas in the competitiveness pillar of the ERGP.
Dr. Jumoke Oduwole, Special Advisor to the President on Ease of Doing Business, Nigeria not at ground zero as far as the AfCFTA is concerned. Take a break, everyone. We'll wrapping it up on the Market Street.